Wonderful. So what we've done so far is we've figured out the number of workers that a particular firm is going to demand at any given wage, given the situation they find themselves in. Right? In the strawberry field example, given the production technology, given the price that they can sell strawberries, and given the number of acres they have under cultivation. So that's pretty great. But for a lot of stuff we care about, we're not just going to want to know how many workers a particular firm is going to hire. We're going to want to know how many workers the entire strawberry industry is going to hire. Right? If we want to make a decision like setting a minimum wage for the strawberry industry or changing worker protections, right, safety regulations, this is going to have industry-wide effects. We want to know how this is going to affect industry-wide demand. So let's take this situation we've been thinking about, but extend our scope a little bit to say that in addition, instead of just having this one firm that has 8 acres under cultivation, we have 100 identical firms. Right? And we want to figure out, let's say that we are the California Agricultural Wage Board, which is an actual thing that exists as a relic of the Great Depression. We're trying to decide what wage to set for California strawberry pickers. We want to know how many workers are going to be hired by all 100 of these firms at any given wage. Make sense? So I'm going to call the labor demand for each particular firm little ld, lowercase l for a firm. And I said that this was going to be given by P over W squared, right? So for a price of 100, right, this is just going to be 100 over W squared, right? This is what we did before. So to start with, we might think, well, if we've got 100 firms, they're all identical, they all want to hire 100 over W squared workers, this is going to be really easy, right? We can finish this lecture video in 2 or 3 minutes, give you guys some of your evenings back, right? We might say for the industry, might be as simple as just saying big LD is just going to be the number of firms times little ld, right? Which would just be 100 times P over W squared. Awesome. So are we done? Do we get to have dinner? There's only one issue, right? The issue is when we're thinking about a specific firm, it makes perfect sense to say that price is just something that exists, right? They're able to sell their output at whatever the market price is. But that doesn't make very much sense if we're thinking about the entire strawberry industry, right? If the whole strawberry industry decided to hire more workers, they would produce more strawberries. When they produce more strawberries, they would flood the market. That would bring the price down, right? In exactly the opposite sense, if they hired fewer workers, they'd produce fewer strawberries. That would raise the price up. So the reason this is going to be more complicated is that this price here is not going to be an exogenous variable, right? It's going to be something that changes based on the labor demand decisions of the firm as a whole. And in order to make accurate predictions about how many workers the strawberry industry is going to hire at any given wage that we set as a labor demand board, right? An agricultural demand board, we're going to have to know how that price is determined. So to do this, let's call what we just wrote down, right, our industry labor demand that doesn't take into account the way that changes in the number of workers is going to change prices, LD hat. So we'll say LD hat at, let's say a price equal to 100 is going to just be 100 times 100, right, the price over W, the quantity squared, right, is just going to be 1 million over W squared. And this is going to be the number of workers that the total strawberry industry is going to hire, given that the price of a ton of strawberries is 100 and the wage of a worker is W. So in this case, let's say that we had P equal to 100 and W equal to 10. We would say that total labor demand at P equal to 100 and a wage of 10 would just be 1 million over 100, which is going to be 10,000. Make sense? So we've got our labor demand curve here. right? Call this LD hat P equal to 100 W, and we're saying that at a wage of $10 an hour, they're going to hire 10,000 workers. Wonderful. So the other thing to think about, right, what we were talking about is how many avocados, or I'm sorry, how many strawberries are we going to grow, given that we've got these 10,000 workers working, right? So the number of strawberries we'll call big Q, and this is just going to equal 100 times little q, right? Times the amount that the number of workers and the number of acres each strawberry field is employing are going to be able to grow. So this means that big Q is going to have to equal 100 times F of 108, right? We've got 100 workers, 8 acres on each farm, which is going to be 100 to the 1/2 times 8 to the 1/3, right? That was our production function, which is going to be 10 times 2 is 20, right? Oh, I'm sorry. What am I doing? This all times 100, right? Times 100. So I'm going to say that my total output of strawberries is going to be 2,000. Cool, right? 20 from each farm, 100 farms, 2,000 strawberries total. So we've got our labor market here. We've got our strawberry market here. And we know in order for the price to be 100, when we've got a wage rate of 10, it's got to be the case, right, that at a price of 100 strawberries, grocery stores, farmers markets, etc., are willing to buy 2,000 tons of delicious, ripe California strawberries. Great. So far the world is at peace, right? There's nothing to worry about. Everybody's very happy. But in order for our labor demand curve to do us any good, right? If we're the California Agricultural Wage Board, we're trying to decide what wage to set. We want to know not just how many workers will be employed at a wage of 10, but how many workers will be employed at any given wage. So let's think through what would happen if we decided to increase wages to $25 an hour. Well, if we just use our LD hat here, right, our naive, we had a price equal to 100 and a wage equal to 25, then we would say LD hat of 25, LD hat at P equals 100, or 25, would equal 1,000,000 over 25 squared, which is going to be 1,600, right? Each firm is going to hire 100 over 25, which is 4 squared is 16, 100 firms, so we've got 1,600 total workers. Right, at a wage of 25, a big collapse in the number of workers employed. But is this what's actually going to happen? Well, let's think about what happens to our product market. Right, when we only have 16 workers employed at each field, right, our quantity is going to go down from 2,000. Right, instead of having 100 times F of 108, we'll have 100 times F of 16 and 8, which is going to be 16 to the 1/2 times 8 to the 1/3 times 100. So we're going to have a Q of 100 times 4 times 2 is going to be 800 tons of strawberries. So instead of growing 2,000 tons of delicious ripe California strawberries, now we're only going to grow 800 tons of delicious ripe California strawberries, right, as a result of this increase in wage. So what's going to happen to the price of strawberries? Well, if demand curves are downward sloping, and demanders were willing to buy, grocery stores, farmers markets were willing to buy 2,000 tons of strawberries at the price of 100, they're probably going to be willing to pay more for the first 800 tons of strawberries, right? We don't know what the price is going to be, but it's going to go up. Say it went up to 200, just to make up some numbers. Well, what happens when the price of strawberries goes up? When the price of strawberries goes up, our labor demand curve here changes, right? We're going to have a labor demand curve that instead of taking the price fixed at 100, we're going to have to fix the price at 200, right? So we'll say, what happens when we have a price equal to 200? Right? And a wage, our labor demand curve for a price equal to 200 and a wage is now going to be 100 times 200 over W squared. So for a wage of 25, right, this is going to be 100 times 200 over 25 squared, which is going to be, right, 200 over 25 is 8, so this is going to be 100 times 64 is 6,400. In other words, because of this increase in price, we're now willing to hire more workers at any given wage, so that at a wage of 25, we're willing to hire 6,400 rather than only 1,600. Does this make sense? So because of this increase in price, we're actually willing to hire more people than we would have if we hadn't taken that into account. This is in turn going to increase the number of strawberries grown, right? Instead of having 800 strawberries, we're going to end up with Q equal to 100 times, right, 64 to the 1/2, right? So 16 times 2, we're going to end up with 3,200 strawberries. No. I don't know what I'm thinking here. The square root of 64 is in fact 8, right? 100 times 8 times 2, so we'll end up with 1,600 strawberries. Right, which means that we'll shift down our demand curve, and we'll end up shifting our labor demand down again, because we'll lower our price. Right? So the point here is, if we want to figure out labor demand at a given wage, we need to account for this backwash back and forth between the product market and the labor market. We need to figure out what the price is going to be as a function of the wage. Beautiful. So the long and short of this is, if we want to figure out how many workers will actually be demanded at a given wage rate, we have to figure out what price is going to emerge out of the product market as a function of that wage rate, right? As the wages change, we need to account for the change that's going to make in the prices of the output. So the way we'll do this is we'll essentially start with our labor demand curve, what I was calling our naive labor demand curve before, right? LD hat in terms of P and W, which is just 100 times P over W squared, right? But then we're going to try to find this P as a function of W. In order to do this, we're going to need one additional piece of information, which is demand for the product, right? Demand for strawberries. So let's say that we've got demand for strawberries as a function of P, given by something like 2 million over P squared. Right? Sound good? So now what we need to do, we need to figure out how does our price depend on our wage. So we know demand for strawberries. In order to do this, we just need to figure out our supply of strawberries. How many strawberries are going to be supplied as a function of P and W? Well, the number of strawberries we grow is just going to be, right, 100 times the number of strawberries each particular firm grows, which is going to be F of L and K, right? Just like we did before. So what's this going to be? It's going to be 100 times L to the 1/2 times K to the 1/3, which is going to be 100 times P over W squared to the 1/2 times 8 to the 1/3. So this thing becomes 100 times 10 times 2 times P over W, right? Or just 2,000 times P over W. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay. So now that we know this, right, we know the number of strawberries that are going to be grown, we just say we're going to find our price by saying quantity supplied in terms of P and W has to equal quantity demanded, right, at our equilibrium price. This is what market equilibrium is. 2,000 P over W equals 2 million over P squared, right? Remember that our goal is to find price here, not to find W. So we can say 2,000 over W times P cubed equals 2 million. P cubed equals 2 million over 2,000 W. So P is going to equal 1,000 to the 1/3 times W to the 1/3, which is going to equal 10W to the 1/3. What's this telling us? It's telling us that the higher the wage is, right, the fewer strawberries are going to be grown. As a result, the higher the price of strawberries is going to be. At any given wage, we can find out the price of strawberries by just multiplying the wage rate to the 1/3 times 10. Awesome. So now the only thing left to do is to plug this in for P up here, right? So we'll finish this thing off by saying that labor demand, right, of the entire industry, just as a function of W, has to equal 100 times 10 W to the 1/3 over W quantity squared, right? From here, labor demand in terms of W is just going to equal 100 times 10 squared, 10,000, times W to the 1/3 over W, W to the 2/3, W to the negative 2/3 squared, so over W to the 4/9. Right? This makes sense? So our final answer is exactly this, right? If we want to know what the wage is going to be, or how many workers are going to be hired at any given wage, it's going to be, given these assumptions, 10,000 divided by W over 4, W to the 4/9. So beyond just being a party, did this exercise teach us anything? Well, I think there's two really important things to take from it. The first is to think about, if we hadn't taken into account that prices change when wages change, would we overestimate or underestimate changes in labor demand brought about by changes in wages? Right? In other words, would our labor demand curve be more or less elastic if we didn't consider that prices change when wages change? I want you to think about that for a second. Okay. So the general answer here is going to be, actually the answer all the time, is going to be that labor demand is going to change less when we take into account the fact that the product market's going to change. And the reason for this is, right, when we increase our wage, we're going to increase our prices, which is going to increase demand. And so while an increase in wage lowers demand for labor by making workers more expensive, since it makes everyone else's workers more expensive, it also makes the product you're producing more valuable, which counterbalances that effect. So in general, our labor demand curves for the industry are going to be less elastic than our labor demand curves for individual firms. And this has an important real-world meaning, because it means if you talk to business owners and you say, how many people would you have to lay off, right, if wages went up? Their honest answer is going to be an overestimate of the number of people they'll have to lay off if everyone's wages go up. The other important thing, which we'll talk about a lot more next time, is that the elasticity of demand for labor is going to depend on the elasticity of demand for the product itself. So if the product's demand is very inelastic, right, meaning people are not that sensitive to price, changes in wages are mostly going to pass through into changes in prices, right? If we go to an extreme and say demand for the product is perfectly inelastic, people are willing to pay any amount of money for the product, right? Then if you increase wages, you're not going to change labor demand at all, because people are just going to, be willing to pay a larger amount for the same amount of stuff, wages are going to have to go up in order to meet that higher price. On the other hand, right, if demand is perfectly elastic, prices don't change at all, and that's going to make demand for labor more elastic. So if we think about how much wage increase can we get without decreasing demand for workers, it's going to depend on demand for the product itself. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for bearing with me. I'll talk to you all about this very soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening or morning, whatever it is.